Throw her out. This place isn't for a server. The words cracked through the most luxurious restaurant in Seattle like a slap. Emma's heart froze as 5 high society women simultaneously turned their backs, their eyes filled with contempt. They mocked her simple dress, sneered at her working-class background, and ridiculed the fact that she had once waited tables in this very place. They thought she was a lowly intruder, pushing into the elite circle, but they had just made the greatest mistake of their lives. Because the husband they believed was too good for her was the millionaire who controlled the careers of all their husbands. And he was witnessing everything. No one is born with a dream of becoming a waitress, but Emma Hart had never felt ashamed of it. She grew up in Auburn, a small town on the outskirts of Seattle, where summers smelled of fresh grass and winters were in endless rain. Her childhood held no pretty playgrounds or lavish dinners, only a cold kitchen and the expense ledger her mother left behind before leaving this world. Emma learned how to live kindly, not because anyone taught her, but because she knew. In a cold world, kindness is the one thing that lets a person keep their shape. By day, she was a librarian at the local public library, arranging worn-out books nobody borrowed, yet wiping every page clean as though they were the town's heirlooms. By night, she changed uniforms and stepped into Union and Oak, a restaurant where crystal glasses gleamed and patrons were always dressed in designer labels. She did not belong there, but still she served with all the care and patience she had. Even when some people would not look her in the eye while ordering, Emma kept smiling, as if no one had ever chipped her heart. Then one Tuesday night during the late shift, he walked in. He wasn't loud like the other men. He didn't order something unpronounceable, didn't demand special treatment. He simply chose a corner table, ordered a bourbon, a plain grilled salmon, then opened a book. It was The Old Man and the Sea. Emma happened to pass by, surprised to see such a weathered title appear in a world of connoisseurs. When she set the plate down, he looked up and gave a slight nod. No wasted words, yet his gaze was not cold. It was the look of someone who had lived, had hurt, and had learned to stay quiet to protect what he loved. The second time, he was reading The Great Gatsby. The third, on the road. The brief exchanges between courses slowly grew longer. They didn't talk about professions, didn't ask how much the other earned. They spoke of loneliness inside big cities, of March afternoons sad for no reason, of the feeling when someone remembers your name without needing to glance at your badge. His name was Ryan Brooks, reserved, gentle, always on time. Emma knew he worked in tech, traveled often for business, but she never probed deeper. There was something about him that made you want to trust without conditions. They began dating with walks around Green Lake, grabbing rushed sandwiches and then sitting still beside each other without needing many words. He didn't bring flowers, didn't promise anything grand, but every time he held her hand, Emma felt herself kept as something precious.
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
A year later, they married. No diamond ring, no lace wedding gown, just a cool afternoon on a small rooftop in Capitol Hill with a few friends and a strand of jazz humming softly from an old speaker. Emma still kept working. Ryan was still Ryan, a canvas jacket, worn-out shoes, and a faded pickup truck. They lived in a third-floor apartment with no elevator, but there was always fresh bread and hot tea. She had never asked how much he had in his bank account or why he never used their joint credit card on business trips. She didn't need to know. She trusted him. What Emma didn't realize was that the man, who still called her my light every evening, held a small empire in his hands. Ryan wasn't lying. He was merely delaying the truth because he feared that if she found out, she wouldn't be herself anymore, and he couldn't bear to lose that. Emma, the woman who once poured water for Seattle's elite, had no idea she was the one shining star that made a millionaire willing to hide his identity so he could be loved the right way. But every secret, sooner or later, faces its test. And Emma would soon learn the humility she freely gave would become the reason the entire city fell silent and took a hard look at itself. Wait a moment, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you enjoy these inspirational stories, and don't forget to leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. It always thrills me to see the whole world come together, even for a single meaningful moment. When Ryan mentioned that lunch, Emma didn't feel afraid. Just strange. She had never heard him talk about the women in his work world. She knew he was a private man, and he hated social events even more. But that day he smiled and said they wanted to know more about his wife, that this could be a chance for her to connect, to meet women who might share a few things with you about urban life. Emma had nodded, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she trusted him. If Ryan said something was safe, she believed it was. That morning, she spent nearly an hour choosing a dress she felt was not too simple but not trying too hard. Her hand trembled as she put on the small earrings her mother had left her. Something made her heart beat faster than usual. Not fear, more like stepping into an unfamiliar room, not knowing what was waiting inside. When she walked into the restaurant where she had once worked every night, everything looked the same, but she was no longer behind the counter. She was a guest, at least in name. They were already seated. 5 women, each with her own style, yet alike in their cold gaze. No one smiled warmly, no one stood to greet her, only perfunctory nods and one empty seat held with visible reluctance. Emma sat down. In her head, she tried to stay calm, reminding herself it might just be initial unfamiliarity. But when the first question sounded, she understood. "Where did you go to college?" She hadn't even answered before she heard the next one from another. "Cute dress, Zara." Then one let out a soft laugh. "I heard you used to work here, so I guess you met your husband while serving?" Her heart seemed to contract. There were no truly vulgar words, but what made it hurt more was the way they were spoken. Light, smooth, as if they were used to peeling a person apart layer by layer without raising their voices. Emma didn't remember how she answered. She only knew she tried to smile, tried to keep her voice steady, tried to prove she wasn't affected. But her heart didn't seem to listen. It grew heavy, sinking minute by minute. She didn't dare look at anyone's face for long. Each gaze felt like a denial of her existence. She was not a guest. She was not an equal. She was the person at the wrong table, and every one of them tacitly agreed on that. Time passed slowly. Each minute was a cut. One time they glanced at each other when she spoke. Another time they changed the subject midway, as if her words were noise unworthy of attention. Yet again, someone sipped wine and curled a lip when she talked about the library where she worked. Small details, but together they formed a complete humiliation. She didn't get angry, didn't cry. She only felt erased, as if she weren't really there at all, just a mannequin in a dress sitting in the wrong place, breathing the wrong way, and answering the wrong questions. Then Catherine stood up. Emma remembered that voice clearly, calm, icy, utterly unflustered. "We think you should go back to the work that suits you. No one here needs someone pretending to be a lady." No one laughed, but no one objected either. Emma rose, not because someone told her to, but because she understood every gaze had simultaneously confirmed it. She did not belong here, not to their standards, not of value in their eyes. She walked out, her hand gripping the cheap bag she now wished she had never brought. She didn't clearly remember how she left the restaurant, only the feeling in her chest, as if it were being squeezed. Not because they had done something monstrous, but because they had made her feel truly inferior. She had once believed kindness would guide her in the right direction, but that day, kindness only made her a fragile morsel among a pack that smiled softly and spoke smoothly. She drove home like a shadow. No radio on, no tears. Her eyes were dry, but her throat burned as if she had just swallowed a silent pool of fire. Emma parked in front of the old apartment, turned off the engine, then sat there. Her hands were still on the steering wheel, her palms icy cold, and her heart was contracting inside an unnamed pain. She had once thought she was strong enough to face anyone, that if she kept kindness, people would not have the heart to hurt her. But those women hadn't needed to shout, hadn't needed to curse. They only needed to laugh at the right moments, ask the right questions, look the right way, to remind her she did not belong to their world. And the worst part was, she believed them. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror, faded lipstick, wind-tangled hair, two reddened eyes still trying to hold up. She looked like someone who had just been stripped bare in the middle of a crowd, and not a single person bothered to turn away. She didn't remember how long she sat in the car. When Ryan appeared on the steps, his eyes flashed with alarm, seeing she still hadn't gone inside. He opened the car door, said nothing, just leaned in and looked straight into her eyes. She couldn't bear that gaze. Tears began to spill. Not anger, not accusation, but a pain so deep it had no sound. She spoke in fragments, shards of memory falling among sobs. The looks, the questions, the mocking smiles, the cold voice and the way they used refinement to wrap cruelty. She hid nothing, didn't sugarcoat, didn't excuse anyone, and then she whispered like confessing a fault. "I think I embarrassed you. I don't belong there. I don't belong in your world." Ryan didn't react immediately. He didn't pull her into an embrace, didn't rush to say anything. He just sat there holding her hand, as if he let go, she would disappear. A silence stretched long enough to suffocate. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady like a tree trunk standing in a storm. "You are my world, Emma. No one has the right to make you feel small." She wanted to believe that, but how could she? After the very people in his world, the ones who understood the language, the rules, the status, had clearly marked that she didn't belong? Ryan stayed silent a long while longer, then calmly told her what he had kept hidden for 3 years. That he didn't just work in tech, that he was the co-founder and largest shareholder of Scale, a startup in data and cybersecurity now valued at nearly $300 million. That his name had once appeared on Forbes' Under 40 to Watch list. That the husbands of those 5 women were all working with or wanted to work with him. Emma sat motionless. She felt the air around her thin out. It felt like she was drifting, weightless. All the puzzle pieces began to fall. The times he traveled on sudden business. The times he didn't say much about work. The apartment that was unexpectedly modest. The car that didn't match the way he carried himself. She had found it odd but never dug deeper because she didn't want to be the kind of woman who interrogated her husband. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was no longer accusing but seeking to understand. Ryan looked at her. In his eyes, for the first time, appeared what he had always hidden. Fear. "Because I needed to know you love me, not the number in the account, not the reputation, not the power, but me, Etono, the man who eats cold sandwiches and forgets his own birthday." Emma let out a faint laugh through tears, a painful but real smile. She didn't know whether to be angry or grateful for what he had hidden. She only knew her heart was racing, not because of what he had, but because of what he had just done. Placed his entire career, reputation, and power in the hands of a woman who had just been humiliated by those craving to step into that world. But she still didn't know. Ryan did not only intend to share the truth, he was about to use that truth to make their entire world flip. Beloved audience, please take a brief moment to relax or have a glass of water and then keep listening. The developments ahead are even more unexpected. Comment number 1 if you find the story good, so we know you are still here. Ryan was not someone who acted hastily. He was quiet in everything, even when in pain, even when angry. But that night, after Emma had fallen asleep drained of tears, He stood alone in the study, eyes on the softly glowing laptop screen. His face was not angry nor sorrowful. It was pure stillness, the kind of stillness that lets others know something irreversible is coming. He picked up his phone. 4 calls, 5 men. Each had once shaken his hand in strategy meetings, once drunk with him at signing dinners. They all thought they stood on equal footing. They didn't know that he was the one who decided whether their projects would continue, whether their budgets would still be approved, whether their career paths would stay straight. Ryan didn't threaten. He simply invited them, polite, formal, to an intimate evening gathering at his private penthouse. No specific reason, just that there was a need to talk and you should bring your wives. The invitation carried no overt pressure, but the silence after each sentence held the weight of a command. No one refused. All the next day, Emma hardly spoke. She didn't ask what Ryan would do, didn't ask to be protected, but in her eyes, something remained unmended. Trust had cracked, and Ryan knew that if he did nothing, if he let this pass like stray raindrops, she would no longer be the woman who once lifted her head because of her own self-respect. Toward evening, Ryan handed her a large velvet-wrapped box. Inside was a deep crimson velvet dress, custom-made, fitting every contour he had quietly memorized. Not gaudy or ostentatious, just a refined beauty, deep and still, like she herself. Along with it was a smaller box, inside a string of emeralds his grandmother had left behind. Emma held the necklace, lightly stroking each lush green stone. In that moment, she realized this was not adornment for a role. This was his way of telling her she was worthy. When they stepped into the wide sitting room laid in white stone and walnut, where every painting on the wall was an original, Emma was no longer the woman cast out from the table the day before. She was the woman of this home, the one walking beside the man they had once considered a business associate. Each couple entered in turn. Catherine came first, her high heels striking the stone floor like tense beats. Alyssa lightly clung to her husband's arm. Brooke didn't look around, only at the wine glass before her, as if searching for a hiding place. Simone and Madeline were cautious, trying to hold a natural air. They no longer recognized this residence. They had not expected that the woman in the red dress standing in the center of the room was the waitress from the day before, and they could not explain why their husbands had gone so silent. Ryan stepped in from the balcony, no suit jacket, no broad smile, only decisive eyes and a low voice, clear as a blade cutting through the performance of courtesy. "Tonight is not for celebration," he said, his gaze never leaving each one. "Tonight is for making amends or facing the consequences." No one answered, only confusion, unease, and furtive glances lacing together. Emma sat down, silent. She did not need to speak, did not need to recount what had happened. Her very presence here, in that dress, in the surrounding soft golden light, was the answer. She had not shed tears to be pitied. She had risen to be seen. And they, each one of them, began to understand what they had done was not merely insult a woman. They had touched the heart of a man with enough power to turn this dinner into the starting point of a chain of consequences none of them had foreseen. The question now was no longer, what will happen, but who will still be standing after these lights go out? The space inside the penthouse thickened, not because of a lack of air, but because of an excess of silence. A heavy silence, like the ticking of a bomb whose detonation time had not yet been set. Ryan did not speak right away. He made one slow circuit around the table, his gaze gliding over each face he had once called a partner. In every step, there was no haste, only the certainty of a man who had nothing left to prove, yet was still willing to remind those who had forgotten their true place. He stopped behind Emma, placing his hand lightly on her shoulder, not to assert ownership, but to give her a quiet reassurance. Then he lifted his head, his eyes sharp and cold, as if dissecting each person before him. "Last week," and he began, "you had a lunch." No one answered. A few chairs shifted slightly, but no one dared look him straight in the eye. At that lunch, you did something I cannot forgive. His voice was not raised, not harsh, yet every word fell like a stone, echoing across the polished marble of the room. She went there with an open heart, brought no reputation, needed no designer label, needed no name recognition, only sincerity. And you took that sincerity and tore it into pieces with arrogance, prejudice, and cruelty. Ryan turned to look at each man seated beside his wife, men who were beginning to understand they were no longer in control of anything. "Catherine," he said, "I invested $2.5 million in your hotel chain. As of today, I'm pulling all of it. The Horizon North project will also be removed from Brightscale's support plan." Not a single objection. "Brooke, I was the principal sponsor for your fall media campaign. I also negotiated for your team to handle nationwide branding. Cancel all of it." Still no one spoke, only panicked eyes threatening to explode behind perfect mascara. "Simone," Ryan went on, "you were brought on to the global strategy group last year because I trusted my instincts. I don't now. You'll be removed from the group, effective tomorrow morning." Emma did not turn around, but she could feel the small shock wave ripple around the table, as if no one had known this place would become the site of careers ending rather than wine being savored. "Madeline," he concluded, "the investment firm you manage used to be the group I placed the greatest trust in for the growth fund. That trust is gone. I won't be renewing sponsorship in the next funding round." 4 sentences, 4 judgments, each like a hammer driving down the lid of a coffin, closing inch by inch. Each a collapse, not loud, not chaotic, but beyond rescue. At last, he moved toward the head of the table. No one moved. Not even the clink of a glass sounded. Only Emma's eyes remained lowered to the table surface. She didn't need to speak, didn't need to cry anymore, because now she was no longer the one needing protection. She was the reason this undercurrent had risen. Ryan set his hand on the edge of the table, his body leaning forward slightly. "I don't need an apology, not because I won't forgive," he said, his voice level like a heart monitor, "but because an apology from you no longer holds value." He paused for a beat. "I only want you to remember, the next time you meet someone who looks ordinary, not wearing designer labels, not dripping in diamonds, think twice before you judge." Still no reaction. But something had just snapped in that room. A mask had fallen, exposing the hollow nature underneath the veneer of power. And that was when Emma lifted her head, not to glare, but because now she had no reason left to face downward. She knew her silence had just become the greatest slap of all. When spring returned, Seattle was flooded with sunlight. But for Emma, that light did not come from the sky. It came from within. After the quiet months of reviving trust in herself, 3 months since the fateful dinner, she was no longer the woman who walked out of the restaurant with wet eyes and a trampled sense of dignity. She was no longer the one who only bowed her head, worked, and ended her shift in silence. She was not the millionaire's wife. She was herself, and for the first time, that was enough. She decided to stop working as a server, not because of shame, but because she understood she had completed a chapter. It was time to write new pages, where she would not only live for herself, but for those like her. Those who had once been judged by appearance, by the apron they wore, by a modest background or hesitant voice. With Ryan beside her, they together founded a nonprofit organization called Grace and Grit, Gentleness and Resilience. Those were the 2 things Emma believed every woman needed in order not to be broken in a loud and demanding world. The organization did not have expensive offices or glamorous events, but it had a clear vision: to open soft skills training classes, connecting women working in service, cleaning, sales, to help them know they have value, even if their shoes are not designer and their life stories are not dazzling. Emma did not like to talk much about the past, but when women meeting her for the first time asked, "How were you able to be confident again after all that?" She just smiled and said, "Because I never let others define me one more time." The media began to pay attention to her story, but not because she was the wife of a millionaire in tech. It was because in a place where she had once worked late, serving customers quietly, there was a woman who dared to lift her head, step out of hurt, and turn it into a foundation for others to rise. She became a voice for thousands of invisible women in society, not with fiery speeches, but with a presence full of warmth and sincerity. In the first days when Grace and Grit opened a skills training class in the industrial zone south of the city, Emma still rolled up her sleeves, welcoming each person with a smile without lipstick, but full of strength. As for those 5 women, the aftershock of that dinner did not stop in the penthouse. News leaked, shares wavered, partner trust declined. Some lost board seats, a few husbands, unable to bear social and internal pressure, chose to step down. Apologies arrived by handwritten letters, emails, and sometimes through acquaintances. Emma did not reply, not because she did not forgive, but because she knew some things only need to be understood. Some lessons should be kept in silence. In a local television interview, the host asked her a question many others had also wondered. If you had the chance to redo that day, what would you say to them? Emma looked straight into the camera. Her eyes no longer hid hurt. Only the calm of someone who had stood up and moved forward remained. I don't need them to fall. I only need them to understand that respect is the most basic thing between human beings, and kindness never goes out of style. There was no round of applause, but that moment spread like fire, not because of revenge, but because viewers saw in it a part of themselves, once judged, once wanting to give up, and once longing for someone to say, "You are still worthy simply because you are you." By Maini, Emma had returned, not with money or power, but with a kind of value no one could take away: human worth and dignity, which cannot be priced by any brand. In life, there will always be people who judge you by appearance, job, or background. But as Emma proved, dignity does not lie in the shoes you wear, but in how you stand back up after being trampled. She did not retaliate with hatred, but by becoming the best version of herself. And Ryan, with a quiet yet fierce love, showed that when someone truly cherishes you, they will not let you collapse in silence. What do you think of Ryan's counteraction? Was it justice or an excessive punishment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have ever been looked down on, ever felt not enough, remember, you do not need to be perfect to deserve respect. Simply not abandoning yourself already puts you ahead of many. If this story touched you, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss healing, inspiring, and justice-filled stories. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again in a new story where ordinary people do extraordinary things.